Hello, and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. 2 weeks ago, I started sharing my thoughts on WoW's secret hunts, and said that I would continue to do so once Incognito had been solved. Well, it was finally solved last week, though I decided to sit on it for a little bit just in case there was something else. But now that it looks like we're in the clear, I want to talk about what I consider the second wave of WoW secrets, that is everything from Dragonflight onward. It is my suspicion that after the Battle for Azeroth secrets, where the player base started to display just how resourceful they could be, both through their ingenuity and their use of external tools, that Blizzard decided to cool it with the major secrets in Shadowlands and come back in Dragonflight with a new philosophy. And the first Secrets of Azeroth event was a major shift in how these puzzles were meant to be approached. For the first time, we were getting major, lengthy puzzles that were designed to be solved by individual players. When I decided to take a crack at it after coming back from a break from the game, I naturally assumed that it would be impossible to solo without a guide, and sort of accidentally wound up cheating the first 2 steps, unfortunately. At which point it did start to sink in that, hey, I can do this on my own. And it was an absolute delight to be able to. There were certainly trade-offs from how previous secrets operated, but the sense of accomplishment you got from doing everything on your own is definitely an upside. And because it is designed to be done on your own, I'm not going to go into very intimate detail about the steps. But basically, it was rolled out in quest format over the course of 17 days, with you being able to binge through any of the previously released steps. Even so, it was quite lengthy, and I wound up spreading it out over the course of about a week. Because it was delivered through quests, there was a bit more of a narrative this time, although I don't think it was particularly strong because I don't remember most of it, but I appreciate the effort. Anyways, the secret involved heavy use of 3 new toys that you earned early on. There was the tricked out thinking cap, that basically gave you a coordinate system. I imagine this was implemented both to avoid needing to rely on external add-ons to use the regular coordinate system, and because they could make finding out the starting point for the coordinates part of the puzzle as well. Basically, whenever you used the goggles, your current location would become 0, 0. And unlike how all coordinate add-ons work, this one basically works like you're making an actual graph. So you could actually have negative values instead of everything being 0 to 100. There was also the Idol of Onara, which when used would put a little searchlight above your head, and this would just hone in on any nearby hints or secret related objects that it was programmed to react to. And lastly, there was the Torch of Pirith, which also would start to light up if you approached an item it was programmed to interact with, and could act as a trigger with certain objects to progress you further in the secret. Overall, it was pretty fun, and I absolutely recommend that you do it without using a guide, and at the end of it, your efforts will be rewarded with the Patty Alpaca mount. An additional puzzle was tacked on that awarded the Mimiron's Jump Jets mount, and I'm not entirely sure how it was initially found. I'm pretty sure the thinking cap was utilized, but at any rate, you needed to find 3 booster parts that you would combine at the Arcane Forge near the Work Orders station in Valdrakken. 2 of these are very easily obtainable on your own, with the 3rd requiring 3 players to use the Torch of Pirith near it. So I imagine incredibly easy to earn back when everybody was looking for it, and a little more troublesome now that you need to find 2 players who still need it. But it wasn't too bad, even a few months later. And I'm sure there were other smaller secrets, but the next ones that I paid attention to were the 20th anniversary ones implemented earlier this year, which collectively we can just refer to as the guest relations. These were divided into 3 different categories. There were the overt quests, the celebration crates, and the incognito mount. The first category, those quests that you were given, are the ones that I would most liken to the previous Secrets of Azeroth. This time around I did do them as they were rolled out, but I don't really think that enhanced my experience. First off, most of the quests were pretty disjointed from one another, and that makes sense thematically. You're basically helping to operate the customer service desk of the event, so logically a bunch of different people would come to you with their different problems. These were pretty much all soloable, and I myself did solo about 90% of them, but unfortunately I feel like this time around there were some quote-unquote bad clues. For example, one of them had you go to the Dragon Scale Expedition Camp in Waking Shores, where you were then told to go south to a hunting village. And naturally, I went to Timberstep Outpost, the home village of the Shikar Centaur, which was the clan focused on hunting. I know this because there was a quest in Dragonflight where you were quizzed on what each of the Centaur clans focused on, and I spent way too long running around this place before I gave up and went over to Marukai, where you were actually supposed to go. Another one that wound up frustrating me was where you were helping Voidfire, who wanted to grow up to be just like Deathwing, and you do this by bringing him to 4 different locations that represent his aspirations to show him that they aren't so great. So spoilers for this particular quest, skip ahead if you don't want them, but the first location you need to find is Blackrock Mountain, specifically the entrance to Blackwing Descent, which is tied to Deathwing's son. Then you need to go to the Badlands, where Deathwing caused a giant scar, then to a cultist camp in the Twilight Highlands, which is at least sort of related to Deathwing, and each of these were basically one zone away from each other. So when the last step asks you to show him the results of flooding, your natural assumption is that it's referring to the wetlands, because in the Cataclysm trailer, Deathwing flies over the Lochmodon Dam and destroys it, which resulted in the wetlands flooding. But no, apparently you were supposed to go over to the Shimmering Expanse. This felt like such a weird choice to me, and even though I can sort of make the connection to Deathwing, it clearly wasn't the best answer they could have come up with. But at any rate, I do feel like there were some pretty good stories told throughout these quests. 2 of my favorites were probably saying goodbye to Skrull Sage Nola, whose voice actress has passed away since Battle for Azeroth, as well as helping everyone's favorite power couple, Rico and Kieran, find a suitable pet. But I ultimately found myself wondering, why were these quests treated as secrets? They could have just been added as little vignettes added to the event roughly every day. We still would have gotten to experience the quaint little stories they provided, and I just feel that having to use our secret finding tools, or looking it up on Wowhead, didn't really serve to enhance the experience. Moving on though, we had the celebration crates, which I consider sort of a middle ground between the quests and Incognitro. That is to say that these felt a lot harder to figure out on your own, but you probably could figure out a few of them. But that ultimately just caused me to be more frustrated because I didn't know how I was supposed to treat them. So first of all, spoiler warning if you care about any of these, but some of them felt very easy to solo, such as the Zuldazar Dive Bar, the Hyjal Bears, or Oshugun, while others felt like there was almost no way you would figure them out alone, at least not in any timely fashion. So again, some of these were fun, but I really would have appreciated some sort of in-game indicator about the difficulty I should have expected, because it's really hard to look that up without just immediately being spoiled. And I ultimately feel like I just wasted time on certain puzzles that I never would have gotten. I know transparency is a little antithetical to how the secrets work, but I think something like that would have been totally permissible. Now then, onto the big kahuna of the patch. Incognitro, the indecipherable fell cycle. This one is indisputably considered a community puzzle, and was overall pretty dang good, although of course I'm always going to have my gripes. The start of the puzzle was first hinted at during one of the other quests for the anniversary event, where there were some distracting wisps which were irrelevant to that quest, whose orientation could be likened to a constellation that would point you to Ungoro Crater, where Lincoln, the WoW Easter egg for Link, used to be located, and there you could find an inert peculiar key where he was located in Vanilla. Additionally, once you earned the detective title from the other guest relations events, you could talk to a Dalaran survivor in Dornagal, which would send you on a short chase of sorts through Ajkahet before you go down a secret hole in Pillar Nest Vosh, where you would encounter our antagonist for the secret, Rats, the Volpera, and the former event coordinator for the anniversary event. Basically, she used to have Alex's job before she was replaced for coming up with these insane puzzles. After you fight her a bit and scare her off, you're able to loot the peculiar gem, which you combine with the inert key, and this allows you to enter the Karazhan Catacombs. As you may remember, this was an area located under Karazhan that was added during Legion and was the location of several artifact quest lines. And upon entering this version of the catacombs, it became quickly apparent that there was a lot to do here. There were so many little hints lying around and things to click and things that you wanted to click but weren't able to yet. And most notably, at the end of the catacombs was the Incognitro cycle. Of course, that didn't mean it was lootable right away. First, we had to fill up the pillars that were surrounding it. And here began the main thrust of the puzzle. I'm going to go over the pillars one by one and give my opinions and feedback for them. And these thoughts are based mostly on how fun I found them to be and less on how they were figured out. The first pillar that the community decided to dub Love required you to bring your torch to the 3 different versions of Mancrick's wife that exist in the game. That is to say, her corpse at her grave in the Northern Barrens, her AU version located in Nagrand in Draenor, and the main universe version currently located in Maldraxxus. I appreciated this one for the flavor and little bit of lore attached to it, but ultimately it wasn't that entertaining to actually execute. You just ran to the 3 places with your torch out. The second pillar, Pray, required you to buy a 25,000 gold item from a vendor. You then needed to go to a small altar in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, use a combination of certain toys, and use the consumable on certain dog pets such as the Perky Pug. Then you had to target the altar obelisk thing and slash pray, and hope that you did it right and that you didn't waste 25,000 gold. I wasn't a huge fan of this step, it just felt kind of random. In fact, most of the steps for this hunt feel random if you weren't there to see how people figured out the instructions. But I suppose that same criticism could be levied at previous secrets, so I don't want to drone on about it. The third pillar, Hate, required you to do some shenanigans inside the catacombs, where you would obtain the starry-eyed goggles, which when used would let you see ghostly objects such as the decryption consoles that were located throughout the catacombs. Each console had a specific input code that you had to enter in order to solve it and obtain a piece of hate, of which you needed 9 in total. These were maybe fun for the people figuring them out, but for the rest of us who just follow along, it was pretty boring. The fourth pillar, Doom, required you to have a Doom Guard active in Uther's tomb in Western Plaguelands. This could be done in several ways, either through the Warlock summoning ritual, or from another item that would just sacrifice the nearest creature to summon one. The nearest creature is you, by the way. But at any rate, while a Doom Guard is active, there are 4 pieces of demonic scrawling in the tomb that you can click on to complete the pillar. This one was a bit more fun because it had some flavor, had you going out into the world, and had you actually doing something other than punching in numbers. The 5th pillar, Muffin, had you going to the Timeless Isle to the cave where Zarhim could be found. You talk to Zarhim and he will transport you into a spectral version of the cave, and in the back of the cave you could pet battle Jeremy Fiesel. The tricky part here is you could only battle him using secret pets. I did have a few of these, although not necessarily the most optimal ones, so all I had to do was spend some of my spared pet charms to get them up to level 25, which thankfully I have even though I don't participate in pet battles. It was probably a lot more frustrating if you didn't have 3 valid pets, or especially if you haven't engaged in pet battling whatsoever and you had to start from the bottom. But from what I've heard other people saying, even starting from scratch you can get what you need in about 2 hours. But then there's the pet battle itself, which you actually have to win, and this can ultimately be a little dependent on RNG. The team that I wound up beating him with had already failed me 4 or 5 times prior to that. But at any rate, once you do beat him, you will obtain the Golden Muffin, which you can spend along with the pieces of hate to obtain a relic of crystal connections from the Pointless Treasure Salesman located inside that statue by Booty Bay, because inside Pointless Things is treasure. I kind of like this step, even though I also found it a bit frustrating. It hit that sweet spot of requiring me to go just a bit outside of my comfort zone. The 6th pillar was Altars, which required you to go to the open world version of Zul'Gurub. Here you could find 5 different altars tied to the words Sin, Corrupt, Succubus, Blood, and Void. Each one required a combination of different pets, toys, mounts, or transmogs to satisfy its criteria. Usually something that has the aforementioned words in its name, although some of them could be pretty ambiguous and hard to figure out on your own. Furthermore, a lot of these conditions would be really annoying to have to satisfy on your own. Granted, I myself was able to satisfy 2 of them, I believe, without outside help. And on that note, you can have outside help, you just need someone near each altar to satisfy it. So it wasn't too bad doing this step as it was discovered and everybody was flocking to the area, but I imagine it could be quite the pain having to come back and do it later. You would either need to find players who do have the requisite items and who are willing to go out there to help you out, or go through the hassle of farming some of these on your own just to progress. So kind of fun and technically soloable, but I don't feel like it was designed with the most foresight. The 7th pillar, Watchers, was probably the most interesting one, and it's kind of a curious case because the owls of the Isle of the Watchers have long been a subject of speculation in the secret finding community. So you kind of have to wonder if this step was implemented as a reference to all of those theories, with any previously existing secrets still being there and unsolved, or if there were never any secrets implemented there and this is just them deciding to use the opportunity to fill it out. But at any rate, what you wanted to do was bring out a fletchling warden owl, which you could obtain at Revered with the wardens, or just buy off the auction house, and then bring it to the different owl statues located around the Isle of the Watchers. At any given point in time, several of the owl statues will be active, and if you stand around long enough, your owl pet will react to it and get a little sort of buff from it, and you need it to be buffed with 4 different colors, although from what I hear, only 3 colors are active at once in a shard, so it can be a bit tricky to get all 4, though thankfully your progress on it is permanent. And once you do have that step, you need to go into the Vault of the Wardens, completely clear it out, pick up one of the light orbs from the basement area, bring it up to a room just before the first boss, pick up a little owl statue, bring it to Glazer's room and place it in the right spot to trigger the Glazer puzzle. This was a really cool setup where you have a 5x5 grid of owl statues, and you need to click them in the right order to get all of them into the ground at the same time. It's basically a version of a lights out puzzle. However, the major complication here is that instead of each owl statue just affecting the statues next to it, it will affect 4 different statues consistently every time you click on that one. And this winds up making it very complicated. Most players, myself included, ultimately wound up solving it by using an add-on or an external website. What you would do is click on a statue and observe which 4 statues it flipped, jot those down and do that for all 25 statues, and then have your add-on or website solve it for you. But I did try a little bit to solve it on my own, because when you click on a statue, it itself goes down. Essentially what you want to do is wind up in a situation where you only have 5 statues up, and those 5 statues to be one of the 25 combinations that you jotted down. And you could get down to a fairly small amount of statues just randomly clicking, at which point you could reference your list to figure out which statue would decrease the amount of statues currently up. So getting down to just any combination of 5 isn't that bad, but the chances of those particular 5 being a valid combination is extremely small given how many possibilities there are total. And look, I'm sure the answer is a lot simpler than I'm making it out to be, but when I try to look up how to solve it manually, I don't find anybody talking about that. They just talk about the add-on or the website, and I don't feel like I'm smart enough to figure out how you're supposed to figure it out on my own. At least with a normal lights out puzzle, it just visually makes sense to you what each button press will do. But here, unless you have amazing memorization skills, you have to look at a list for each one, and it just gets extremely convoluted. So while this step was still very fun to execute, I'm at least a little bummed out that it feels nigh impossible to do it manually. Though who knows, maybe I'm missing something that makes it a lot simpler. The 8th pillar, Enigma, was actually pretty fun to do. There are several pressure plates located throughout the Karazhan catacombs, as well as several statues that you can drag around. And once you get to this point, if you put statues or yourself or any critters are on the plates, it will light the plates up to a different color depending on how many objects are on top of it. So the solution here was to use the Enigma machine inside of the catacombs, which would then spawn a bunch of rats. You wanted to count the rats and then reference a table to let you know which pressure plate you wanted statues on and how many. And I believe the correct answers were just determined by trial and error by the community. Although there is a slight hiccup in that there are catacomb rats located inside the place as well that can wander onto the pressure plates and throw things off. So you want to make sure to kill them, but also they respawn after a little bit, so you want to keep checking to make sure that they stay dead. So overall, I think it was a pretty fun step to execute. And that brings us to the 9th pillar, Vault, which simply required you to go back to Pillar Nest Vosh in Ashgahet and input a certain code into the chest there. This code was determined using a riddle and the date of the 20th anniversary event, and certain modifications to that date to get to the correct combination. And yet it still took like a week and a half for players to get past this step. And because ultimately, if you don't know the thought process of the developer who made it, it can feel very random. Anyway, once you open the chest, you will get the keys to the Incognito, which is rather surprising because we had 3 pillars left, and now those pillars are filled in with void orbs, which makes it feel like there's still something left to do. Additionally, at least one of the rooms in the catacombs was unused in the puzzle, as well as several objects, as well as Ulzic's hatch, which was found inside the Mechanar dungeon. Like, surely something remains or will be implemented in the future, but as far as we can tell, this is the end of things as it currently stands. Also, as a little bit of flavor, it's a little weird that when we got the keys, we just got the mount right away there in Ashkahet without having to go back to the catacombs where we physically saw the bike. But that's being nitpicky. What are my thoughts on the puzzle overall, though? Well, I of course thought it was fun, and I don't want to dog too much on the developer. I'm sure a ton of hard work went into it, and I know people absolutely loved it. But I have to offer up my criticisms. As always when designing puzzles, a lot of stuff can seem not that complicated when you're the one making them, but from an outside perspective, it's a lot harder. And unfortunately, this is very hard to test for, especially when your target audience is going to be an army of thousands of players. I also wasn't a huge fan of how ultimately a lot of them just boiled down to go click on these things, which I was definitely more forgiving of in earlier puzzles. So it's a bit unfair, but at this point I just want more. And also at this point, maybe soloable puzzles are just more appealing to me. I also feel like too many of these steps just involved math or using weird number logic. And I know certain members of the secret finding community love that, but it just wasn't for me. My favorite steps across all of the puzzles we've gone have been the ones that were more personalized and active. So the yellow monocle from the Hive Mind, the endless halls from Lucid Nightmare, and the owls from this one, even if I would have preferred if it was easier to solve manually. So I think if I was ever given the opportunity to design a secret hunt, I would lean hard into these steps and basically make every step some miniature game that you have to figure out. But I'm sure other players would hate that, so don't take my opinions as gospel. Also, I kind of really liked the idea of the catacombs serving as an escape room of sorts. This is kind of what I thought the Ziscara vaults were gonna be when I read about them, except those were like stupidly easy. So if you had done something with the catacombs where you basically need to figure out one step which lets you figure out another step, which is kind of what was done, but design it to be more soloable and where you don't actually leave the catacombs, I think that would have also made for a really fun puzzle. So yeah, I want to reiterate, I did still have fun with this puzzle. I really hope I'm not coming across as overly critical. Anyway, for this week's drawing, I decided to go with Maev Shadow Song, and I did so, of course, because of the owl statue puzzle in the Vault of the Wardens. I know in my Illidan video, I mentioned that I ship her and him together. I really like the enemies to lover dynamic that they could have if Blizzard ever followed through on it. But I just like her in general as well. She is my favorite night elf that is still 100% a night elf. So I am excluding characters like Illidan and Ajara. And funnily enough, I didn't really like her back during the Frozen Throne. I feel like that's probably because she was set up as opposed to all of the pre-established night elf characters. She's hunting Illidan, she lies to Malfurion, and she shows disregard for Tyranda's life, which nowadays just endears me to her all the more. But back then I just basically went with the signaling that Blizzard was putting out, which was that she was a little unhinged and you shouldn't like her that much. Also, I don't really know the details on it, but I know that between the Burning Crusade and Legion, she went a little unhinged, part of it in response to Night Elves allowing mages back into their society. And I kind of like Maev for this too. I don't really like that we're drifting towards every race being able to play every class. I recognize the arguments for it, but it just feels to me like it's really deteriorating racial identity in the game. And one day I will make a video on that. Also, I'm kind of dumb because it took me way too long to notice the owl imagery in Maev's design and the design of Wardens in general. I mean, it became a bit obvious in Legion, but before that, like, come on, Zook, that helm is clearly supposed to resemble an owl face. And you know night elves love their hooters, how did you not figure this out sooner? And I decided to stick her in Azuna just because that's where the Vault of the Wardens is located and is ostensibly the home base of the Wardens. It would have made sense to draw her in or near the vault, or at least near one of the Warden towers, but I decided to put her more in Azuna proper. Azuna has always been one of my favorite Legion zones. I think it's freaking gorgeous, and I don't feel like I did the best job portraying it here, but I do think I got the color palette right at least, so there's that. And we can just headcanon that this is Maiev going out and taking a little break near the beach, catching all of those lovely rays through her thick black Warden armor. And that's all I have for now, so thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Bye-bye!